The ghost truck. The night was dark and cold, the kind of night that made you wish you were anywhere but on the road. But for Jack, there was no choice. He had to get home, no matter what. As he drove down the deserted highway, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The road was empty, the only sound the hum of his engine and the occasional gust of wind. But then in the distance, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A truck, a ghostly apparition, was coming straight at him. At first, Jack thought he was imagining things. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, or hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But as the truck got closer, he realized that it was all too real. It was an old beat-up pickup truck, the kind you'd see on a farm or in a junkyard. But this one was different. It was glowing as if it was made of pure light, and it was moving impossibly fast. Jack tried to swerve out of the way, but it was too late. The ghost truck crashed into him, sending his car spinning out of control. When Jack finally came to a stop, he was dazed and disoriented. His car was a wreck, but somehow he had survived. As he stumbled out of the car, he saw the ghost truck disappearing into the distance, as if it had never been there at all. Jack knew he had to get help, but he also knew that no one would believe his story. He was alone, stranded on a deserted highway with nothing but the memory of that ghostly truck to haunt him for the rest of his days. Years later, Jack would still tell the story of the ghost truck, a cautionary tale to anyone foolish enough to drive down that cursed stretch of road at night. And though many would scoff at his tale, there were others who knew that there was truth in his words, and that the ghost truck still roamed that highway, searching for its next victim. Some said that the ghost truck was the manifestation of a driver who had died on that stretch of road, seeking revenge on those who dared to cross his path. Others believed that it was a cursed vehicle, driven by a vengeful spirit who had died in a horrific accident. But whatever the truth, one thing was certain: the ghost truck was real, and it was dangerous. Over the years, there were countless reports of sightings of drivers who had seen the ghostly truck looming up in their rearview mirror, coming straight at them on the road. Some claimed that they had been chased by the ghost truck, pursued relentlessly as they tried to escape. And then there were the accidents, the collisions that could not be explained. Drivers who had swerved off the road or crashed into obstacles that seemed to appear out of nowhere. As the stories spread, the legend of the ghost truck grew, becoming a cautionary tale for anyone foolish enough to venture down that haunted highway at night. But for some, the legend was more than just a story. It was a reminder of the darkness that lurked on the edges of our world, of the things that we could not explain or understand. And for those who had seen the ghost truck with their own eyes, it was a reminder that sometimes the past never truly dies, and that the sins of our ancestors can haunt us for generations to come. Years passed, and the legend of the ghost truck continued to grow, but as the world changed, so too did the highway. The old road was replaced by a new one, wider and safer, with modern guardrails and bright street lights that chased away the darkness. As the years turned into decades, the sightings of the ghost truck became fewer and fewer, until they were little more than a distant memory, a ghost story told around campfires and at sleepovers. But then, one night, a group of teenagers decided to take a shortcut down the old highway, the one their parents had warned them about. They were looking for a thrill, something to break the monotony of their small-town lives. As they drove down the deserted road, they laughed and joked, unaware of the danger that lurked around every turn. And then in the distance, they saw it, the ghost truck. At first, they thought it was a trick of the light, or a figment of their imagination. But as it got closer, they realized that it was all too real. The truck was glowing, a shimmering apparition in the middle of the road. And as it approached, the driver swerved, trying to avoid it. But it was too late. The ghost truck crashed into the car, sending it spinning out of control. And as the teenagers stumbled out of the wreckage, they saw the truck disappearing into the darkness, as if it had never been there at all. In the days that followed, the authorities tried to explain away the accident. They said it was a case of reckless driving, of teenagers being foolish and irresponsible. But those who had seen the ghost truck knew the truth. The legend was real, and as long as that haunted highway remained, the ghost truck would continue to roam, a spectral reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the safety of the modern world. The ghostly hitchhiker. It was a dark and stormy night, and I was driving down a deserted road in the middle of nowhere. As I drove, I noticed a figure standing by the side of the road. It was a hitchhiker, his thumbs stretched, looking for a ride. feeling sorry for the poor soul. I pulled over and opened the passenger door. The hitchhiker climbed in and thanked me for the lift. He seemed like a nice enough guy, so we struck up a conversation. As we drove, I noticed that the hitchhiker was getting more and more agitated. He kept looking out the window and muttering to himself. Finally, he turned to me. I was taken aback by his statement. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I was killed on this road," he said. "I was hit by a car and left for dead." I didn't know what to say. Was he serious? Was he playing some kind of sick joke on me? Before I could say anything, the hitchhiker disappeared. He was there one moment and gone the next, as if he had never been in the car at all. I pulled over to the side of the road and looked around, but there was no sign of the hitchhiker. I was alone on the road once again, except for a feeling of unease that lingered in the air. For the rest of the drive, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. When I got home, I did some research and discovered that several people had been killed on that road over the years, including a hitchhiker who had been hit by a car and left for dead. Was the hitchhiker who disappeared in my car a ghost, doomed to roam the road where he had died? Or was he just a figment of my imagination, a trick of the mind on a stormy night? I'll never know for sure, but one thing is certain: I won't be picking up any hitchhikers on that road again. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I kept thinking about the hitchhiker and his strange disappearance. Was it all just my imagination, or had I really picked up a ghostly hitchhiker? To ease my mind, I decided to visit the spot where the hitchhiker had disappeared. As I approached the area, a sense of dread washed over me. I parked my car and got out, scanning the area for any signs of the hitchhiker. That's when I saw him. He was standing in the middle of the road, his form barely visible through the mist. He beckoned me forward, and I felt a strange compulsion to follow him. As I walked closer, the hitchhiker began to fade away until he was nothing more than a ghostly apparition. I stood there, frozen in terror, as the ghostly hitchhiker disappeared into the night. From that day on, I was haunted by the ghost of the hitchhiker. He would appear to me at the most unexpected times, a ghostly reminder of the night I had picked him up on the road. I tried to ignore him, to go about my life as usual, but the ghostly hitchhiker would not be ignored. He was a constant presence in my life, a ghostly reminder of my own mortality. In the end, I knew I had to face my fears. I returned to the spot where the hitchhiker had disappeared, and I waited for him to appear. When he did, to my surprise, the ghostly hitchhiker listened. He disappeared into the night, and I never saw him again. Now, whenever I drive down that road, I feel a sense of peace. The ghostly hitchhiker is gone, and I can continue on with my life. But I'll never forget that night and the strange and terrifying encounter with the ghostly hitchhiker. In the days that followed, I couldn't help but wonder about the hitchhiker's story. Was he really a ghost to wander the road where he had died? Or was he just a figment of my imagination, brought on by the stormy night and I decided to do some research to see if I could find any information about the hitchhiker's death. After hours of searching, I finally found a news article about a man who had been hit by a car and left for dead on that very road. The article confirmed everything the hitchhiker had told me. His name was John, and he had been walking home from work when he was hit by a car. The driver had fled the scene, leaving John to die on the road. As I read the article, a sense of sadness washed over me. John had been a real person with hopes and dreams and a life to live, and yet he had been taken from this world in a senseless act of violence. I knew then that I had to do something to honor John's memory. I decided to create a roadside memorial for him, a small plaque that would remind people of the tragedy that had occurred on that road. It took some time, but eventually I was able to secure permission to install the plaque. I chose a spot near where John had been hit, and I inscribed it with his name and the date of his death. For a year after that, I would visit the memorial and pay my respects to John. And though I never saw the ghostly hitchhiker again, I knew that he was at peace, knowing that he had been heard and that his story had been told. In the end, the story of the ghostly hitchhiker had become more than just a scary tale. It had become a reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of remembering those who have been lost. And though I had been scared and uncertain at first, I was grateful for the experiences and for the lessons it had taught me. The haunted highway. It was a long, winding road, stretching out into the darkness ahead of me. As I drove down the highway, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. There were rumors about this road, stories of ghostly apparitions and strange phenomena. At first, I dismissed these tales as nothing more than urban legends, but as I drove deeper into the night, I began to see things. I tried to shake off these feelings to convince myself that it was all in my head. But then I saw her, a woman standing at the side of the road, her form barely visible in the darkness. I slowed down, unsure of what to do. The woman didn't seem to notice me at first, but as I got closer, she turned and looked directly at me. I could see now that her clothes were tattered and torn, her hair wild and unkempt. For a moment I hesitated, unsure if I should stop, but then something compelled me forward. I pulled over to the side of the road, and the woman climbed into my car. As we drove down the haunted highway, the woman remained silent, staring out the window with a haunted expression. I tried to make small talk, to ease the tension in the car, but she didn't respond. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, the woman disappeared. I looked over, and the seat was empty. I slammed on the brakes, pulling over to the side of the road, my heart pounding in my chest. For a moment, I sat there trying to make sense of what had just happened. But then I heard the sound of whispering voices, coming from all around me. I looked out the window, and I saw them. Ghostly figures standing at the edge of the road. Their eyes fixed on me, they seemed to be whispering to each other, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I knew then that I had to get out of there. I hit the gas, and my car lurched forward, hurtling down the haunted highway at breakneck speed. As I drove, the ghosts seemed to follow me, their whispering growing louder and more insistent. I tried to ignore them, to focus on the road ahead, but their voices were like 1,000 needles, pricking at my skin. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, they were gone. I looked around and the road was empty. The whispering had stopped. I drove on, my heart racing, until I finally reached the end of the haunted highway. And though I never saw those ghosts again, I knew that they would haunt me for the rest of my days. A reminder of the things that lurk in the darkness, waiting for us to pass by. I never forgot that night on the haunted highway. It stayed with me, haunting my dreams and my waking moments. I tried to convince myself that it was all just my imagination, that there was a rational explanation for what I had seen. But deep down, I knew the truth. That road was haunted, and I had been foolish to tempt fate by driving down it. And yet, despite all the fear and terror I had experienced, a part of me couldn't help but be drawn back to the dark and haunted place. So, months later, I found myself back on the haunted highway, my car creeping slowly down the winding road. This time, I was determined to find answers, to uncover the secrets of the dark and haunted place. As I drove, I kept my eyes peeled for any sign of the ghostly figures I had seen before. And then, just as I had almost given up hope, I saw her, the same woman who had disappeared from my car all those months ago. I pulled over to the side of the road, my heart racing, and the woman climbed into my car once more. This time I was determined to get answer. I asked her who she was and why she haunted that stretch of highway, but the woman remained silent, staring out the window with haunted eyes. And then, just like before, she disappeared into thin air. Determined not to give up, I continued down the haunted highway, searching for any clues to the woman's identity. And then I saw a signpost pointing to a nearby cemetery. I knew then that I had to investigate. I parked my car and made my way through the dark and overgrown cemetery, my heart pounding with fear and anticipation. And there, at the center of the cemetery, I found a tombstone marked with the woman's name and the date of her death. It was clear now that she was a victim of the very accidents and tragedies that had made that stretch of highway so haunted and terrifying. As I left the cemetery, I felt a sense of closure, of peace. I knew now that the ghosts that haunted that highway were real, and that they had a story to tell. And though I never drove down that haunted road again, I knew that it would stay with me forever, a reminder of the power of the supernatural and the mysteries that lie hidden in the shadows. But even with the answers I had found, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. And so, I began to investigate further, digging deeper into the history of the haunted highway and the tragedies that had taken place there. As I researched, I uncovered more and more stories of ghostly apparitions and strange occurrences along that cursed stretch of road. It was as if the road itself was alive, a living, breathing entity that fed on the fear and terror of those who dared to venture down its dark and twisted path. And then one day, I received a call from a local historian who claimed to have information that could unlock the secrets of the haunted highway once and for all. Eager to learn more, I met with the historian and listened as he shared with me a story that would change everything. Right? According to the historian, the haunted highway was once a site of unspeakable horror, a place where a group of travelers had been brutally murdered by a band of ruthless bandits. The victims had been buried in a nearby field, and their spirits had haunted the road ever since. As I listened to the historian's tale, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. It was clear that there was more to the story than anyone had ever imagined, and that the ghosts that haunted that highway were far more malevolent than anyone had ever suspected. Determined to uncover the truth, I continued my investigation, piecing together the clues and stories that I had gathered over the years, and in the end, I finally found the answers I had been seeking. The ghosts that haunted that highway were not simply the victims of accidents and tragedies, but the restless spirits of those who had been brutally murdered by the bandits who had once ruled that cursed stretch of road. And though I knew now that I would never truly be able to rid that highway of its ghost, I was content in the knowledge that I had uncovered the truth, and that the restless spirits of those long-dead victims could finally rest in peace. Oh. The phantom car. It was a dark and stormy night, and the driver of the old red pickup truck was making his way home from a long day at work. He'd taken this road 1,000 times before, but tonight it felt different. There was a chill in the air that went straight to his bones, and the wind howled through the trees like a pack of hungry wolves. He glanced in his rearview mirror and saw something that made his blood run cold. There was a car behind him, its headlights shining like twin beacons of doom. The driver couldn't make out much about the car in the darkness, but it looked old, like something from another era. He tried to shake the feeling that the car was following him, but every time he looked in the mirror, there it was, getting closer and closer. The driver's heart raced as he considered the possibility that he was being pursued by a ghost car. As he reached a sharp curve in the road, the driver's worst fears were realized. The ghost car suddenly swerved out of control and careened off the road, crashing into a tree with a sickening thud. The driver of the pickup truck slammed on his brakes and rushed to the scene of the accident, but when he got there, the ghost car was nowhere to be seen. Some say that the ghost car still haunts that stretch of road to this day, appearing in the rearview mirrors of unsuspecting drivers before disappearing into the night, and some say that the car is driven by the ghost of a young woman who died in a similar accident years ago. As for the driver of the pickup truck, he never forgot the terror he felt that night, and he never drove down that road again. But on quiet nights, when the wind is just right and the moon is full, he sometimes swears he can still hear the screech of tires and the shattering of glass as the ghost car crashes and vanishes once more into the ether. The driver's heart was pounding in his chest as he stood there in the rain, staring at the spot where the ghost car had crashed. He tried to tell himself that it was just his imagination, that there was no such thing as a ghost car, but deep down he knew that he had seen something truly supernatural. As he climbed back into his pickup truck and continued on his way, the driver couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He kept checking his rearview mirror, half expecting to see the ghost car bear down on him once again. But the rest of the drive was uneventful, and the driver eventually arrived home shaken but relieved. To be safe, he didn't tell anyone about the ghost car, afraid that they would think he was crazy. But he couldn't stop thinking about it, and 4 days afterward he kept replaying the incident in his mind. Eventually, the driver went back to that stretch of road in the daylight, hoping to find some explanation for what he had seen. But there was nothing there, no sign of any accident, no indication that anything out of the ordinary had ever happened. Years went by, and the driver eventually forgot about the ghost car. But every once in a while, when he was driving alone on a dark and stormy night, he would remember the phantom car that had followed him down the desolate stretch of road, and he would shudder, wondering what other terrors lay waiting for him in the darkness. Despite the driver's best efforts to forget about the ghost car, it continued to haunt him for years to come. Every time he drove down that stretch of road, he couldn't help but glance nervously in his rearview mirror, half expecting to see the ghostly headlights of the phantom car once again. The driver became obsessed with the ghost car, researching local history and scouring the archives for any clues that might explain its existence. He discovered that there had indeed been a fatal car accident on that road many years ago, and that a young woman had died in the crash. Some people claimed that her ghost still haunted the area, and that the phantom car was her restless spirit, doomed to forever drive the same stretch of road where she had met her untimely end. The driver's obsession with the ghost car began to take a toll on his life. He became increasingly reclusive, avoiding friends and family in favor of spending his evenings poring over old books and documents, searching for any shred of evidence that might help him understand what he had seen. But no matter how much he searched, the driver could never find a satisfactory explanation for the ghost car, and as the years went by, in the end, the driver was never able to shake the memory of the ghost car. Even on his deathbed, he still spoke of the phantom car. The Vanishing Hitchhiker. It was a dark and stormy night, the kind of night that makes you grateful for the warmth and security of your car. I was driving down an old winding road that cut through the woods, my headlights illuminating the rain-slicked asphalt. I was tired, but I couldn't afford to stop. My destination was still hours away, and the thought of spending the night in my car was not an appealing one. That's when I saw her. She was standing on the side of the road, soaked to the bone. Her thumb stretched. A hitchhiker. Normally, I wouldn't have picked up a stranger in the middle of the night, but something about her tugged at my heartstring. Maybe it was the fact that she was a young woman, no more than 20, and looked like she was freezing to death. I pulled over to the side of the road and rolled down my window. "Need a lift?" I asked, trying to sound friendly. She didn't say anything. She just climbed into the back seat of my car and shut the door. I started driving again, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. She was staring out the window, her face expressionless. For a few minutes, we drove in silence. The rain beat against the windshield, and the wind howled through the trees. Then out of nowhere, the hitchhiker spoke. "Can you turn up the heat?" she asked. I reached down and cranked up the heat, watching as the temperature gauge climbed higher and higher, but the hitchhiker didn't seem to notice. She just sat there, shivering. After a few more minutes, I realized that something was wrong. I hadn't heard her breathe, hadn't felt the car shift as she moved. I turned around to look at her, and that's when I saw it. She was gone. The back seat was empty. I slammed on the brakes, my heart racing. I searched the car frantically, looking for any sign of the hitchhiker. But there was nothing. No wet footprints on the carpet, no open doors. She had vanished into thin air. I sat there for a moment, trying to make sense of what had just happened, and that's when I heard it. A soft whisper, like a ghostly breath. "Thank you," the hitchhiker said. And then she was gone, leaving me alone on the dark and stormy road. I never picked up another hitchhiker again. Days passed, but the memory of the vanishing hitchhiker stayed with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had encountered something otherworldly, something that defied explanation. I tried to convince myself that it had all been a trick of the light, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and stress. But deep down I knew the truth. The hitchhiker had been a ghost, a lost soul doomed to wander the lonely road where she had met her demise. As the days turned into weeks, I became obsessed with the idea of finding out more about the hitchhiker's story. I scoured old newspapers and talked to locals, trying to piece together the puzzle of her life and death. What I discovered was both tragic and chilling. The hitchhiker had been a young woman named Lily, who had been killed in a hit-and-run accident on that very road decades earlier. Her body had been left to rot in the ditch, and her spirit had been haunting the road ever since. I knew then that I had to do something to help Lily find peace. I returned to the spot where I had picked her up, and there I found a small, weathered cross, marking the spot where Lily had died. I placed flowers at the base of the cross and whispered a prayer for her soul. That night, as I drove away, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. A figure glowing faintly in the darkness was walking away from the cross and disappearing into the trees. It was Lily, I knew it, and this time she wasn't alone. She was surrounded by other spirits, all of them walking towards a bright light that shone in the distance. I watched them until they vanished from sight, and then I drove away, my heart heavy but also relieved. I had helped Lily find her way home, and that was all that mattered. From that day on, I never forgot the vanishing hitchhiker. Whenever I drove down a lonely road, I kept my eyes peeled for any sign of a lost soul who might need my help. And I knew that even though Lily was gone, her memory would stay with me forever. But years passed, and I never forgot the night I encountered the vanishing hitchhiker. I wrote about my experience in a book, hoping to raise awareness about the dangers of driving on lonely roads at night. and to help others who might encounter similar situations. The book was a success, and I received many letters from readers who had experienced their own encounters with ghosts and spirits. Some of the stories were frightening, while others were heartwarming, but all of them reminded me that we are not alone in this world, that there is a mysterious and often terrifying realm beyond our understanding. One day, as I was signing copies of my book at a bookstore, a woman approached me. She was middle-aged with tired eyes and a weary smile. She handed me a piece of paper, folded in half. "I think you might be interested in this," she said. I unfolded the paper and read the words written in careful script. "I am Lily's sister. Thank you for helping her find peace." My heart leapt in my chest, and I looked up at the woman, tears in my eyes. "I didn't do anything," I said. "It was Lily who found her own way home." The woman smiled and nodded. "Yes, but you gave her a helping hand, and that's more than most people would do." I hugged the woman, feeling a sense of closure and gratitude. Lily's story had come full circle, and I knew that she was at peace, finally reunited with her loved ones on the other side. As I left the bookstore, I looked up at the sky, feeling a sense of wonder. And I knew that the world was full of mysteries, both beautiful and terrifying. But I also knew that, as long as there were people like me who were willing to lend a helping hand, the lost souls of the world would never truly be lost. They would find their way home, guided by the light of love and compassion.